Welcome everybody to another episode of IGN Unfiltered, our mostly monthly at this point in time. Everything is weird. It is our monthly interview series where I get to sit down physically or virtually, in this case, with the best, brightest, most interesting minds in the gaming industry. Today, my guest, I'm very pleased to be joined by Marcus Lehto. He is the co-founder of V1 Interactive. They're hard at work on a new game, new first-person shooter, Disintegration. We'll talk about that. But also a longtime Bungie veteran, the co-creator of the Master Chief himself. Marcus, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Appreciate being here.
So, obviously, we are not sitting at our nice barcade setup as we normally would be. So I definitely just want to start by asking you, how are you and your team adapting to this new work-from-home situation, particularly as you guys are getting close? You're trying to finish a game here.
Yeah, we are now 6 weeks in. We've kind of lost track of time and the days that have passed by, but it's been a challenge for us for sure. Moving everybody from the studio into our virtual setup where we're all working together to wrap up this game has been super, super hard. Especially as we close out and doing the more difficult things like perf testing and other issues, on consoles and things that we really rely on the hardware at the office and our connection together as a team. But that said, I mean, we're doing our best. We're all in the same boat together, and we're getting through it one step at a time.
Now, we've seen a lot of games get delayed. Have you guys been kind of set back at all, or have you been able to stick to your existing timeline?
Just a little bit. Fortunately, we were already coming into the landing strip with the final stages of the game, so. Yeah. We were able to stay mostly on track, which is good. It's just the those last little details to finishing up a game are oftentimes some of the most difficult problems to solve. So that makes things a little bit more challenging for us, for sure.
So we're going to talk plenty more about Disintegration. Right now, I want to walk you back in time. Let's figure out how you got to where you are. We'll take a walk down memory lane here. Oh, now, you have an art background. You have I'm curious. So you were an art director at Bungie. You've always been an art guy before crossing over with Reach, Halo Reach, and beyond into design proper and leading projects, but. Did you always have a penchant for art as a kid? Was it something you were always good at and pursued, or something that kind of you just worked hard at until you got good at it?
I had never really considered myself much of a great artist by any means, but the things that I loved doing as a kid, I loved taking stuff apart all the time. The first thing I would do is just try to problem solve. Yeah. And I think like taking things apart and then putting them back together all the time. I do that all the time. Was part of the process of figuring out how things work and figuring out how you could kind of make something different from it. That's when like Legos came into being, and I was like, oh my God, I love Legos, and I could create anything I wanted as a kid. And it really fed into that creative, construct something that's not only just cool to look at, but also does something really neat. So I was always interested more in the functional side of things, and how it worked and what purpose it served mostly. I got interested in art in just focusing on that. The more I went through my school process and into high school, where I found I had more of a penchant for doing that kind of thing, and really enjoyed it. It's something I put a lot of passion into, and it just wasn't just painting or anything like that. It was in all facets of it. Was in the drama club, and I was in band and choir, and I just loved all of that, that creative energy that comes from doing something, whether it be performance or whether it be creating some story for a stage performance, or whether it be creating some beautiful image or work of art in some way.
So your
that's
parents,
kind of the foundation of it.
Your parents probably thought you were going to be an engineer. You're sitting there taking stuff apart, putting stuff back together. We've got an engineer on our hands here.
There was one point, and this is my dad was taking me home. I don't know where we were, but we were coming home late at night, and someone had thrown away, one of those giant console stereos that they used to make, where they're huge and they probably weigh 200 pounds. Someone had it sitting out on the curb to be thrown away. And I said, "Oh my God, Dad, I really could we take that?" But he's like, "You're crazy. Let's go home." So we did, but I kept talking to him about it throughout dinner, and then later that night, we got in the car at like 11:30 p.m., drove out there and picked that thing up and put it in our hatchback car. I don't know how we even fit it in there. And I dragged that thing down into our basement. And over the course of the next 3 weeks, I had it was like made out of tube resistors and all that kind of stuff. I had the entire thing pulled apart.
Yeah.
And all organized by tube size and everything out on the basement floor. And just to discover, like what all the little pieces and parts and the resistors and everything, all the little things that function within it. And then I started to put it all back together. And that was kind of like this weird thing that I liked to do as a kid, just to learn about how things work, and what goes behind it. And I ended up taking some of those parts and turning those speakers into speakers that I put into my Chevy Chevette hatchback when I got my first car. That's kind of what they turned into being eventually. But I don't know, maybe my parents thought I was crazy at that time, but.
Well, they sound super supportive, though. Like the fact that your dad was willing to get back and basically go pick up a giant pile of trash for you.
Yes, exactly. So he was very supportive. They've always been super supportive, and that's one of the things I feel really blessed with over the years, is that they didn't look at my passion for art, visual design, or anything like that. Even as I went from high school and into college, focusing on graphic design as a major, they did support it. There were times, of course, when I remember one of my college professors pulling me aside, and he goes, last week I had a visit from your dad. Like, what? He came out to my college to like talk to you about this? And he goes, he just wanted to make sure that you had any potential career path moving forward with creative design or anything like that. Just to make sure, because on his side of things, he is, my dad's a preacher. He was a Methodist minister for many, many decades. And he just wanted to make sure that that pursuing art actually is something that could produce a viable career, because there was a lot of concern about that for them at that time. Even though they fully supported me with it, they wanted to make sure that somehow coming out of college, I wasn't going to be living in a cardboard box for the rest of my life.
Well, what a compassionate thing, though, because your dad, he didn't try to shame you with it, right? And tell you, no. Hey, there might not be a thing here. That he just quietly went and spoke to an expert that had been educating you. So I don't know, I find that to be a very sweet story.
Well, yeah, it turned out we had a little chat about it, and he was like, yes, okay, I just wanted to make sure, Marcus, that you are on the right path. And we had a nice coffee, lunch, and such about it afterwards, and it was a good catch up with my dad at that point.
Well, I'm skipping ahead, but now while we're just talking about your dad, now that I've learned a little bit about him, I gotta know, when you become a game developer, and specifically when you ship Halo, I mean, Bungie had hits before that, but when Halo becomes this just juggernaut of a thing, does your dad kind of grasp what happened? Does he start to see it on billboards or on TV, or does the sort of societal impact of Halo reach his ears and eyes at all?
It sure does, and it was boy, that throughout the entire Halo series, as we continued working on the projects and as it got bigger and bigger and became more of a cultural phenomenon, the impact that they had on it, and people that they knew, even in their age group, that would come to talk to them about Halo and what it meant to them and their children, and how so many people were affected by it positively one way or another. And that I think that's the kind of thing they felt really very happy about, that it turned out the way it did.
That's awesome. I love that. So were you a gamer as a kid? You're taking stuff apart, you're learning that way. But did games appeal to you as a kid?
Yeah, they did. I loved games, but there weren't many available at that time. When I was, I think my first introduction to games really was the Intellivision, right?
Yeah.
With Pong and Frogger and Pitfall and that kind of stuff on it. But my first actual experience with deving a game, my best friend, his name's Ted, back in the 4th and 5th grade, he had a TRS-80, and he was really into programming at that time, with a little tape deck on the side of the TRS-80. And he made, and I sat and worked with him through this whole process, but it was mostly him who did it, was just make a Moonlander game where, I don't know if you ever seen the original Moonlander that was an arcade game, but he basically simulated that as a 5th grader. He made a Moonlander game, and where you just use the arrow keys to try to land your little Moonlander on a jagged moon surface.
Lunar Lander's the Atari version, I think, right?
Lunar Lander, that's right. Yes. So it was my first experience with the actual construction of a game, and I was fascinated by that. I had no idea how to program or do anything like that at that time. That was way beyond my skill set. But I could start creating some kind of visual design from it. And so, as I mentioned earlier, my dad, as a minister, he didn't make any money at all. So we were not well off as a family at that time. We made ends meet just fine, but so we could put food on the table. My mom and dad could, but we didn't have a lot of money to spend on anything like an Atari system. I always had to go over to my friend's house for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we did have, at one point, my uncle got us a Commodore 64. And I think that was kind of the real beginning of my total infusion of understanding what games meant to me. As I played games like Lode Runner and Tron and Zork, even summer games, and those kind of fun games that you could get at that time. But it was also a time when I started fooling around with creating my own characters, or just trying to use really basic programming to create little teeny avatar characters and that kind of stuff. It was fun. That was the kind of time for me to experiment and try to grow as much as I possibly could, in understanding how to create something with very little understanding, with the kind of things that you could do with a system like that.
So in hindsight, was Ted's Lunar Lander clone your superhero origin story moment?
It was kind of it was kind of a moment where I said, oh my God, that would actually be really fun to do. And I was convinced that Ted was going to become a game developer, and that
he didn't, though?
He ends up learning how to hack into systems and get really good at doing that kind of stuff, and he works for the NSA now. So
that'll work.
He had a completely different trajectory, but I was convinced that I would be the one sitting around looking at this guy going, oh man, he's the famous game developer, he's the guy out there doing something really awesome, and I would always be jealous of him for doing that. And I thought, that's only just a dream for me. But as I continued moving along and playing other games like Myst and Journeyman Project and that kind of stuff, as games kept evolving and getting a little bit better, I was always taken by the storytelling within some of those games, like Journeyman Project. And then I loved the action and the thrill of games like Marathon, and even the simulation of. I used to love flight sims.
Yeah.
Like A-10 Attack, I think it was called, and Chuck Yeager's Air Combat and whatever, that kind of stuff back on some of those older games. I loved World War II games like Hellcats Over the Pacific. Those were just fantastic. And then my true first mod, I think it was a game called Spectre on the Mac. It was really one of the only multiplayer games you could play at that time.
Right.
And I remember I took all of the audio files and I made my own mouth sounds for them, and created my own version of Spectre, basically. That and at this time, this is shortly after I had graduated from high school, or from college, sorry. And I was working as a graphic designer in Cleveland, Ohio. We had fun sharing this game, this modded version of the game from graphic design studio to studio, and we would play it together on Friday nights, and it became this weird thing where all these people were playing this version of the game that I had created mouth sounds for, and I don't know, it became this kind of my first infusion into actually modding games and seeing it as a real possibility for something that I might want to pursue as a career, even though I had no idea how to get there.
Yeah, but you went to Kent State. You majored in graphic design.
Yeah.
So what was the original dream for, or at least what was the idea for what you wanted to be when you grew up? Were you still tracking towards game development and this is how I want to get there, or were you thinking something else for a while?
No, when I went to Kent State, the graphic design program there is one of the best in the area for like real true hardcore design. It was a fantastic program to go through, and it's one of those programs that I still look at as being a foundation for almost everything I do, even to this day. So I'm real grateful for that whole process. But I could tell the entire time, Ryan, that I wasn't passionate about graphic design. I liked it. I was okay at it. It wasn't something that I was.
Well, your heart wasn't in it. If you're right, you're just okay at it. That's probably why, right?
It wasn't. So, but I kept pushing on and learning. My first graphic design jobs or so were just really, really boring jobs, and they were okay. It was I was learning the ropes. But I got into a really great studio, Karen Skuta Design Studio in downtown Cleveland. I think she's still there. She was one of the best graphic design studios in Cleveland. And it was one of these opportunities that I started breaking out from just doing typography. And it started exploring 3D architecture and 3D product design, so we could really visualize how clients' products are going to look and how they're going to function. And it was all a great learning experience. I loved doing this kind of stuff. Just building out. I built the entire city of Cleveland at one point because we were taking on a project to build out one of the waterfront projects, and how we were going to handle signage and how we were going to handle traffic flow and all this other interesting stuff through it. And no one had ever done that before, like build the city of Cleveland. So after I built that, I kept getting a bunch of calls from other architectural studios wanting to get this model from me, because it was a great baseline for them to use for their own work. But it was one of these kind of things that the more I explored that, the more I realized I think this is where my true passion lies. It's not just the construction of 3D content it's the exploration of those worlds that I was building. It was like putting the camera into those worlds and animating that through, and then also playing around with the animation of characters and the design of objects that live in it. And that all became truly fascinating to me.
So now how do you end up at Bungie? Because I think we're getting closer. Where does that leap come into play?
So after pursuing that career in graphic design for, now this is going on 8, 9, almost 10 years.
Wow.
I had continued to learn the 3D side of things, and now I was picking up other projects like with multimedia projects with Macromedia Director, and learning scripting and starting to get more in depth with building interactive experiences. At the same time, I'm still playing games, and Marathon was one of those games that I just loved playing. It was fantastic. I played it with my friends. We would play it all the time together just to burn steam. And it was just one of those fluke things where I looked at the back of the box. I didn't really know much about Bungie at all.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what the heck? I'm working in this job right now that I enjoy, but games would really be amazing if I could somehow get my foot in there. I don't know how a guy working in Cleveland is going to get into games. I mean, games is not a thing in Cleveland, Ohio. It was this real leap for me to take at that time. I just reached out to them via, I actually wrote a letter, since email wasn't a thing at that time, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, but not much. So I wrote a letter to Alex Seropian, the president,
one of the co-founders, yeah.
Yes, of Bungie. Got a letter back from him, and then some correspondence about possibly having a talk with them. So I did. I flew out there. We interviewed, and after I got back, Alex made me an offer, but it was not a lot, and it wasn't enough to make me make a move at that time. And this is I had just. My wife and I had gotten married. This was back in 95. My daughter was born in 96, and I couldn't imagine moving from Cleveland to Chicago, even though I love Chicago. That's where Bungie was located at that time. Yeah. I just was enamored with the idea of moving to the city, but I couldn't imagine making it work given what Alex was offering at that time. So 2 more rounds over the course of about 6 months. There were other offers made, and finally one that stuck. And I said, okay, this is great. In between, I should mention, I was working with Alex. Actually, I was working directly with Jason on the UI graphic design elements for Myth: The Fallen Lords. So building out the entire UI for the game. It was one of those things I could do as a contractor, doing it remotely. I went out and bought a Mac 8500. I was doing all kinds of stuff on that, just working out of, building it out of my house, doing whatever I could to come up with cool designs for the game remotely with the team. And it was it worked out pretty well. Like I had a dial-up modem at that time, like a 14.4
we all did,
modem.
yeah.
Yes, and so I would email Jason chunks of the UI bit by bit over the modem, and I think that was that gained enough confidence to that final offer. Then, of course, that Alex made to have me join the team full time.
That's cool. You played a little hard to get, but also then got that proverbial foot in the door, like you were talking about.
I needed to, and it was. I think it all played out nicely after that. So Alex and Jason are fantastic, and I loved the correspondence with them over the course of that time, and Bungie was real small. I think when I joined, there were only 10 11 people or so.
Wow.
So it was a teeny little studio.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about Jason in a second, but first, the key question of the interview. Now that you're into Chicago, if take nothing else from this interview, if not this. All right, Chicago, deep dish pizza or cracker thin? Which way do you go?
So we that was the first thing we dove into was the deep dish pizza. Yes, we made sure that we had plenty of that, and Bungie Studios was located on South Halstead, not so great an area town, but we would always order the pizza in because there weren't too many places to go right around the office location at that time.
All right. So early days of Halo now, you've joined up, you've helped on Myth, you've got this sci-fi strategy game, you've got this build, you've got this sort of game started where you're tearing around in this warthog, in this vehicle around this strategy world, and that starts to get super fun. This is how I've heard the story over the years. So and you end up, of course, switching to first person, but at what point during the process of Halo's evolution does Master Chief himself come about? Because that's, you are credited as the creator of the Chief himself. Where does he kind of fit in the timeline of strategy game, Warthog, this is kind of cool, let's bring the camera in, first person shooter? So where in there does the Chief come in?
Yeah, when I first moved out and joined Bungie and started working there on site, it was just Jason and myself working on the very origins of it, like you had mentioned, the strategy game that was skinned with a sci-fi theme. Even at that time, there was a character that we called the Super Soldier, and that Super Soldier in all honesty, it was the very root of what became the Master Chief. It was an armored character. The very first iteration of that thing, I think it was all of 400 polygons. I'm not kidding you. It was this teeny little thing that would stand next to this tank and would run alongside the tank. And then we built this vehicle that would ultimately become the Warthog that character could also jump into and drive around. These early versions of that universe, we were exploring, some of the tech, of course, at that time, but I was responsible for looking at what this universe really was, and like how it was functioning, what it was made of, how it was going to be built, and it's like some of those things that I harken back to. It was like taking things apart,
yes,
and looking what's inside and figuring out how we're going to exploit that and use that and turn that into something really cool. The Master Chief ultimately was born from that very first model as it evolved several times over the course of the construction of that early phase of the game. And we'd spent our time going back and forth on making sure that we were we were exploring territory that was interesting not only to us, but something that we thought would work cohesively together. And as you mentioned, like it went from that strategy game where we look from a camera down onto the field and we are commanding a large set of units, very much like Myth, because it was built on the Myth engine. And we continued making modifications to some of the behavior of items in the world, like the vehicles, and how they navigated around the terrain and how they physically responded to things, to the point where we got so excited about that and how that played out that we thought, why aren't we driving these things ourselves instead of just watching them drive themselves around on the ground? It would be a lot more interesting, wouldn't it? So we tried it, and at that time we had a couple more people who joined the project, which was fantastic. Charlie, who's now the president of Bungie, was just out of school, and he was working on the engineering side of things. He specifically was the one working on the physics for the Warthog. We all got excited about that, and we decided, all right, we're going to change this to this third-person cam game. We're going to give this a shot, see how this action kind of plays out. And through that time frame, of course, the Master Chief continued to turn from something other than just this really, really simple block model to something that started to look more like this armored, like this true super soldier that we continued to call him at that time. And it wasn't until I think we got closer to the Macworld demo that he had existed simultaneously with another version of the Master Chief that one of our concept artists at that time, his name is Shikai Wang, who's fantastic, great, talented person. Still with Bungie now, had worked on some early concepts that were more anime inspired for the Master Chief. And we built that character, and it was much more slender and agile looking, I think, at that time. And that's the character that we showcased in the Macworld demo. And then it was shortly after that I felt pretty strongly that the Master Chief and who the Master Chief really is needed to embody something that more physically connected with his character. And as we started writing the character, the actual story for Halo, and as we started writing who the Master Chief is as that empty vessel that the character, would really take the reins with, that slender character wasn't the right kind of feel for the Master Chief, and that he needed to look like a tank that could take on an entire army. And that's when I had gone back to some of my original designs for it and continued to iterate on the final designs for the Master Chief as what we would see in Halo Combat Evolved.
So I'm curious, were you involved in casting Steve Downs, local Chicago radio guy, for the voice of Master Chief when that finally came around, or is that all Marty O'Donnell's joint?
That was 100% Marty. When he went out with his connections and finding folks that he was... either he had worked with them before or just knew of these actors, and he had his connections with the audio community and the actors within. So... yeah, we were real happy to find Steve as the Master Chief.
What a voice on that guy, huh?
Yeah, boy, he sure does.
It's still to this day, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, great.
So you started to talk about Jason Jones a little while ago. Kind of I think of him as kind of the Wizard of Oz. Like he's the man behind the curtain. Like he's these days he's really quiet. He almost never gives interviews. I got to interview him 2014, and I'm not sure he's given a big interview since then. So what is Jason like to work with? Like, is he? Because he strikes me as kind of that a little bit of a John Carmack kind of a strange genius at work, and I mean that in the nicest way. But what is your sense of him from working together with him so closely over the years?
Yeah, Jason and I had a really great connection when I first started working with him. It was just the two of us. It was effortless as far as just the creative connection. He's one of like the original game dev kind of folks who can pretty much do anything you want. We, as like young 20-year-olds at that time, and not really having any formal education for building video games by any means, you had to learn everything on your own.
Yeah. And
Jason was just really incredibly smart. It still is, of course. He is, he is easy to talk to. He is, I consider him like a brother of mine now, with the way we've worked together over the years. But he takes a lot on his shoulders. He takes a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. He's an introvert when it comes to getting in front of a crowd. He works best in a small team, and he loves that. And because he loves having his hands in the engine, working on a game hands-on, and it was the kind of passion that I shared with him.
So now Halo's blowing up. The game ships, of course, the Microsoft acquisition. I guess is your wife, are you on board with moving out to Seattle when Microsoft? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you talk about it as a company. You're a small company. Hey, Microsoft wants to buy us. It goes ahead, but is that nerve-wracking for you, like packing your life up and heading to Seattle?
Yeah, when we moved from Cleveland to Chicago, we pretty much were sure that we would never move further west than that, because we wanted to be closer to our family. Our parents and my brothers, sisters, everybody was still back in Ohio. As we entertained the move from Chicago to Seattle, that was exciting for everybody, but it was also really concerning for us, a lot of us. And at that time, I think we had 45 people or so at Bungie. So it was a considerable crew to consider moving from one city to another. It was very worrisome for my wife. I had 2 children at this time, and do we really want to move that much further away from family? So we wanted to consider it. Microsoft was fantastic, actually, about flying us out, having us go through some introductions for the area and acclimate us to the area, and really provide a ton of great resources for Bungie as a studio when it comes to settling in, trying to find some place to live, and make that transition as smooth as possible. So we did, and we thought, okay, we'll give this a shot. It might be a year or two. We'll see. Once we get done with Halo, we'll get that out the door, and then we'll maybe move back to Ohio. That was the plan.
But then I'm curious. Humor me this. What time of year was it that they were flying you out and sort of showing you around and trying to sweeten the situation for you?
Yeah, we did kind of luck out, because it was I think it was either late spring or summer. So it was the beautiful time of the year to be out here. So it was absolutely a huge factor.
I have heard that Microsoft does a lot of their recruiting in the summertime when it's nice, to try and see, look how beautiful it is. There's no rain. What are you talking about?
During our 3-month window of beautiful weather, and it is one of the most beautiful places in the country to live for those 3 months. Yes. But we loved it out here. It was the kind of thing we fell in love with this area when we moved out in 2000. And we thought while we would probably move back, it did not take long before our roots just kind of planted here, and we were just enamored by not only the beauty of the area, but all of the opportunities that we had here as a game studio, knowing that this probably would be a long-term future for us.
Well, and go figure that, nowadays, if it were now and you were at Bungie now and Microsoft was buying you, they probably would have left you in Chicago and not forced you to transplant out to the mothership.
That is definitely true. That is definitely true. And, it would have been interesting to see how that would have played out. But, we built the studio as best we could when we first made that transition from Chicago to Seattle. They planted us in a temp building in Redmond, not too far from the main campus.
Yeah.
And it was actually the first time when we were working together as a studio. They put us initially right in these, we were used to working in a completely open office situation, which was not a thing at Microsoft at all.
Right.
It didn't
cubicles,
exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they put us in 8-foot high cubicles, so we couldn't see each other in this open room, but because we couldn't actually make eye contact with one another, we were isolated within each one of these cubicles. We almost fell apart as a team. We had just made this pretty traumatic transition from Chicago out here to the Seattle area. Now we were stuck in these cubicles. We were working on trying to really transition everything we had done with Halo, which was mostly foundational work. We didn't even have our first level put together for the game yet. And we were frantically trying to figure out how we were going to turn this game into an Xbox launch game. And that was an incredibly difficult transition for us to make. Not only that, but then we were in this different working condition that we weren't used to. And it really broke down our communication to where we begged and pleaded with Microsoft execs. We're like, we really do need to figure out a different working situation here for our studio. So we found some additional space not too far away, and they blew out the room for us. It was this big open studio, and it turned out to work just fine for us then in that case.
So Halo comes out and it just blows up. It's obvious it's the killer app. It is the thing that gives the Xbox project life. Was there a moment where the sort of, did the reality of its success hit you in any sort of thunderous way at any specific moment, or was it just sort of this gradual thing you kind of, that became normal for you?
You know, every game that we've ever shipped, that I've ever personally shipped, it's the kind of thing where you sit on pins and needles for those initial launch moments, because you have no idea what to really expect as far as how it's going to be accepted by the community, and what kind of legs it's going to have beyond that. The reviews started coming in, the community started chiming in with their feedback on it, and the more positive kind of comments we started getting back, the more we thought, oh, well, maybe we actually really did do something kind of interesting here that is connecting with the community, beyond just our own studio, because we built the game initially to be something that would be fun for us to play. We always enjoy making games. We always wanted to make games that would be games that we'd love to play as well, of course. And when you have that kind of passion for your own game that you're building, of course, that translates through into something that we hope would reach a larger audience. But we didn't realize at all just how special that connection would be, or how widespread it would be. We had no idea. And it took several months beyond the launch of Halo 1 to really recognize the fact that it was going to be something that was much bigger than what we had initially envisioned.
Yeah.
And that really fueled us. That got the team very, very excited about laying down what became a franchise.
Can you all go in at some point and just demand huge raises from Microsoft because you've just shipped this incredible thing?
No, as a matter of fact, we were just as normal employees, and not receiving. Of course, there were no royalties or anything at that time. But we wanted to try to see what we could gain on that front, to see if we could get some kind of reward for the hard work that we put into it. And there was a lot of hard work that went into it. So we ultimately, we got what we called the 2% milk plan. It was 2%, and that was what we were able to agree on with Microsoft. It came from many, many months of arduous negotiation with the execs. It was something that was, that was really hard at that time, because, of course, no internal team would receive royalties for anything they did.
Right.
To have one team go rogue and do this kind of negotiated agreement with them was really atypical. So I was happy that we were able to do that. Of course, it's the kind of thing that as Halo continued to blow up and become this bigger franchise over the course of the years that we always wished we could have negotiated for more. And of course, I'm no billionaire as a result of the success of Halo. It was nice to us over the course of the years.
So the first seed was planted for what would become Bungie's eventual separation from Microsoft.
Yeah, that might have been the first thing for sure. We realized that as a studio, we had a culture internally that we relished and that we wanted to protect and maintain. And as the leadership, as we continued growing as a studio, my role as a leader within the studio, and then ultimately part of the core team that would negotiate the buying back of Bungie, was something that I was really excited to be part of throughout Bungie's history.
I know I'm starting to run out of time with you. We still got to get to Disintegration, your new thing, but first, real quick, you got to humor me because every former Bungie-ite. Not sure if that's how you refer to yourselves, Bungie-ites, but every former Bungie person that I've talked to, I always have to ask this question. Mm-hmm. And you would have been very deeply involved in this. What was the ending of Halo 2 supposed to be? What was that last bit supposed to be that didn't end up happening?
Oh, man. This is the kind of thing that as we ran out of time and because we set our goals so lofty with Halo 2. Halo 2 is a really challenging project for us. I think that was probably the most challenging of all of the series, because it was where we had come off the success of Halo Combat Evolved. Halo 2 was something that we wanted to not only one up what we had done with Halo, the first Halo installment, but build a much bigger story, a much bigger universe. And we bit off way more than we could chew. And we knew that it was going to be a challenge for us. And the leadership at that time, we were also having a hard time trying to figure out how the studio matures and becomes a much more efficient and responsible team and studio. Something that we weren't super successful with at that time in Bungie's history, but and it led to a lot of difficulty as we went through that project in wrapping it up and trying to end it cleanly. How it ends, Ryan, I got to be honest with you. There were so many weird endings to it that. Joe Staten and Jason were two of the key people working on the story at that time.
Yeah.
And just, holed up in a room almost all the time, really focusing on trying to wrap it up, that the mystery still lives within.
Oh, so you're going to make me... You're, all right, we're passing the buck to Jason. Now I got to go talk to him again, or Joe.
No,
I see how it is.
We got to get Jason back on board here.
No, it's all good. So, all right, well, we're on our way to Disintegration here, but first, the next and arguably biggest key moment is Halo Reach, because you become a project director for the first time. You lead Reach. This is a game that is... many Halo fans' favorite Halo game. The Reach is a beloved title in the Halo universe. What is sort of your or I guess I'll start with, what did Halo Reach teach you about leading a team rather than you'd stepped up from art director?
So fortunately, it wasn't a binary switch for me to go from Halo 3 as art director on Halo 3. Part of the interesting transition for me personally was, and this goes back to some of the earliest things we talked about with regards to always having this passion for understanding the underpinnings of how things work, how things function. I always love understanding and delving into what every discipline is doing, what every discipline can do to work together more efficiently. And as an art director, that was one of my roles in the studio, but also as a leader within the studio, as a someone who would help bridge the gaps between content and design and engineering. It was always a critical part of what I did every day throughout the game's development. So it was a natural progression when we went from Halo 3 and started working on Halo Reach. As part of the studio had gone off to start working on ODST, and then a very small portion had already started incubating what would ultimately become Destiny with Jason. So moving on to Halo Reach, we had a great foundation that we had with Halo 3 behind us, and we had this fantastic engine to work with. But we wanted to really try to encapsulate all of the wonderful things we had done with the Halo universe over the course of the years, and pull all those things that we were most passionate about together into one final game that would be our thank you basically to the community for supporting us and following us through this entire journey that we had been on together with Halo.
I love that final message that pops up at the end of the game there, which is a literal thank you to the fans of Halo. I thought that was a really nice touch.
Yeah, because it was bittersweet for us, Ryan, as we wrapped up Halo. We had worked on it for so many years, and while we were very eager to move on to do something else, we knew that all of our success, all of our stories that we had together had come from the Halo franchise, and that Halo meant a lot, not just to our community, but to all of us as developers and who we had become as individuals.
So you moved over, to my understanding, you started on doing some Destiny stuff for a while, but ultimately you'd come to depart Bungie, and if I have this correctly, was it not on quite the friendliest of terms?
Oh, it wasn't too bad. When I left Bungie initially, I left Bungie twice. So the first time, I had decided that we had moved on to the Destiny project. It was working fine. I enjoyed Destiny. It had already had a team of leadership with Jason and a whole bunch of people already in place. And then I had my team of leadership as well as all of the individuals on the team. We had about 250 people tops at that time on Halo Reach.
Wow.
So moving that entire team over and integrating them with the Destiny project was super challenging. We had also purchased ourselves back as a studio. We had moved to a new location. And so we had a nice big new studio to move into. So that was kind of exciting and fun. But I was kind of feeling out, how we were going to make this work together as we worked on Destiny in this new form with this new team. We didn't have an engine yet. It wasn't really quite production ready at that time. So there was a lot of exploration of what we were going to do next. And, I spent about 8 or 9 months working on Destiny before I realized that I think one of the best options for me was to leave and start my own studio, or at least start thinking about something on that front, about what I wanted to do next. I did leave amicably. It wasn't all that bad at all. There was some back and forth, of course, with the leadership on it. They weren't happy about it. But I spent about 6 months or so on my own trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. Bungie called me back, said, hey, would you be interested in actually coming back and starting another project? I said, well, that sounds like a great opportunity. I would actually like to entertain that because, I'm still good friends with the Bungie leadership and many of the people there. So I took up the opportunity and started working on a complete completely different game prototype with a very, very small team in the basement of Bungie. We called ourselves the troglodytes living down in the basement because we had no lights, no windows, or no natural light down there. And but it was fun. I mean, we were actually able to pull together a playable prototype within about 6 months and pitch the idea to leadership within the studio. And that all went great. But Destiny itself was struggling at that time to stay on track, and they needed laser-like focus from everybody in the entire studio. And our team and our little project was a bit of a distraction.
Sure.
And it also didn't have a clear ramp to production that would be feasible with the existing leadership and the existing staff. So I decided at that point that the message was pretty clear that we probably wouldn't be able to get the support we needed, and it probably wasn't the right place to be building a game. So I left one last time and said my final goodbyes to my good old friends at Bungie and went out on my own 100%.
So, wow, it's almost a strange reverse parallel to when you first got hired on. You were repeatedly hitting them up to try and get hired in the beginning, and then at the end, they were repeatedly trying to keep you.
A little bit, yeah. It's kind of strange when you put it that way. I never even thought about it like that. But yeah, it was. I think it was a good way to end my relationship with Bungie. And as I said before, I'm good friends with them still. A group of us still go hiking at least once a year to just hang out with one another and stay connected in that way.
I'm glad to hear that. That makes me happy. All right, so I've got about 15 minutes left with you. We've got to talk some Disintegration here because you're not here for your health. You're not here to take a walk down memory lane. You've got a game to promote. That game is Disintegration, and it is. To me, I haven't actually had the chance to play it yet myself, but I've seen it a number of times in action. We've covered it extensively on IGN. I'm very intrigued by this game. It is a first-person shooter. It's got these heavy strategy elements. I'm curious what inspired it, because I couldn't help but think a little bit about two games I really like. Full Spectrum Warrior. I don't know if you ever played that game back in the day.
I never played it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
and Brothers in Arms, a little bit of that too. So I'm sort of curious about the inspiration for Disintegration.
Not that I wanted to stay too close to my roots with Bungie, but Myth: The Fallen Lords was one of those games that I think I'm most connected with, especially as I had a hand in helping build it initially, and then it became a game that I stayed connected with after we moved from Cleveland and into the Chicago zone. I could stay connected with my friends. That way, we played it all the time online together. And the most visceral aspect of the game that I think I was really interested in connecting with was that real-time tactical element and how that played out on the battlefield in a way that was really tactile. It was very visceral and very exciting to watch play out. So that was the kind of thing that as I started exploring game ideas, which were numerous at that time, when I first started exploring what we wanted to do with our first game here at V1, that this hearkening back to Myth: The Fallen Lords and building something that was almost a spiritual successor to that was the initial underpinning of where we started with an actual playable prototype, where it was sci-fi. It was based in the universe of Disintegration, but It was something that was a very different beast at that time. And it's so weird how it paralleled Halo, going from the RTS to first-person shooter. And it was not intentional by any means, but it was something that was this natural progression of how we explored the idea initially, and then led to something that we felt was much, much more exciting, regarding putting the player in the position of controlling that camera in the sky in a way that they are an active participant in combat. And then from there, things just exploded to the point where we got so excited about what we were building because we understood that there wasn't really anything else like it out there.
So I'm curious. It's the gaming industry has changed so much just in the last 5 years, let alone 10. How do you get visibility on a unique new idea like this? Because I'm not trying to butter you up by saying, like, this is a different kind of, this is not your average first person shooter. It is, for better or for worse, it is very different. And that's great in and of itself. But how do you get visibility and try to sort of break through that noise now, where there's 10,000 games releasing every single week?
Right. Part of that is, well, part of it is we rely on the fact that we have a legacy in building games that allows us to at least talk to the people we feel like we want to talk to and can talk to discuss what this game is about. That's, of course, one part of it that we have to acknowledge. The other big part of it, Ryan, that I really try to focus on as much as I possibly can is making sure that we built something that is as polished as possible. As an art director, coming from that art director background, as someone who's very interested in the mechanical underpinnings of how things actually function and work together, not only just with the game, but then how the team as itself pulls all of those ideas together and brings them into concert with one another. There are so many great game ideas out there that just aren't executed to the point where they get into that quality level that is actually something that can be showcased. That's the kind of thing that I really like to focus on, making sure that that last 10% is something that becomes really special as a result, because it's really hard to get through that last part of understanding how all of those final pieces and parts can work together, and how you can make it not only play great, look great, but feel great as a title. I feel like
that polish. I mean, you see it. You can look around the industry. It must be really difficult because there are plenty of high-profile games that don't have that polish when they first get into gamers' hands. So it's got to be a big challenge.
So it is, and then it is also a huge challenge for us as a brand new indie studio with only 30 people in it, and we have this one opportunity to make to make a mark one way or the other of like saying, hey, here's what we really are excited about. Here's what we're hoping that the community at large is also excited about joining us as we debut this title soon, and as we get excited to showcase more about it.
So what's the vision for V1 Interactive? Do you want to grow it over time and become as big a studio as Bungie was during your heyday there, or do you intentionally want to stay smaller and leaner? How do you see yourself and your team evolving and growing together over the coming years?
I believe we will want to grow just a little bit, Ryan. I don't want us to ever become a large studio. While I enjoyed building and being part of Bungie as it grew from just 10 people to now it's close to 700 people, that kind of team size is not something that I'm terribly interested in pursuing anymore, because I realize how, as a small team, as a close-knit family of developers, we can be so much more efficient. We're so much more hands-on. We all wear lots of different hats at the studio, because we have to out of necessity. But that's part of what makes gaming so much more interesting. I'm one of the, I don't know how many game dev leaders of studios are actually also working as an individual contributor on the games, but I'm kind of got my blinders on when it comes to that kind of thing, talking to other developers of other studios. but I'm one of those individuals who also likes building games. I like getting my fingers greasy in the engine every day, along with the rest of the team as we build this game together. So it's really important to me that we maintain that kind of connection as a team, where we can we have deep understanding of what the game mechanics are, how they work together, and everybody is directly connected to and invested in what we're building then as a result.
So before I let you go, I'm curious, you've had a hell of a career thus far, and you've got plenty left to go, and you've seen a lot, done a lot, accomplished a lot. This is like a cheesy, stupid question, but I think it could be really, your answer could be really enlightening for people, whether they're looking to get into the industry or what have you. I'm curious what piece of advice you would give yourself from, if you could go back to the beginning of your career and talk to yourself now. Is there any sort of wisdom or advice you would impart upon yourself?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Having gone back, and if I were to look back every 5, 10 or so years, I look back at what I used to do and how I used to behave and how I had tackled things at that time. I think just having a leveler head and just being calmer about how to go about dealing with problems that are difficult to solve, and having just having a little bit more patience was one of those things that I wish I would have been able to tell my younger self, because at that time we were all so young and we were all so inexperienced and incapable of understanding how to tackle the challenges in front of us. So we were all figuring it out together. It led to issues that could have easily been solved had we just had a little bit more patience in stepping away from the problem for a moment, absorbing what's there, and then just calmly going back to tackling that challenge. I mean, that's how I do it now, and that's how I feel like we can maintain a steady course without too much disruption as a result.
Well, there it is. All right, Marcus, when do we have a specific date for Disintegration? Do we have a window? When can we play this video game from you and your new studio?
The date right now is still 2020 this year. More details on that are coming up pretty damn soon.
Fair enough. Marcus Lehto, the founder of V1 Interactive, one of the leads on Disintegration, a new, very unique first-person shooter sort of strategy hybrid. You got to give it a try. Videos don't even, and I say that as a guy who puts videos on a website, so I shouldn't say this, but videos, I feel like, don't do this game justice. You got to play it for yourself. As my colleague Brandon Tyrell has been telling me repeatedly, said you got to really play it to get it. So, Marcus, best of luck on the stretch run to you and your team, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate you having me here today.
For more from the best, brightest, most interesting minds in the games industry, look for a new episode of IGN Unfiltered every month.